There is a certain kind of man that prison systems are not built for. Not the violent man, they have procedures for that. Not the broken man, they have cells for that too. No, the man that confuses the system, the man that makes guards glance twice and hardened inmates go quiet, is the calm man. The man who walks through intake processing like he's done it 1,000 times, even though he hasn't. The man who doesn't perform toughness, doesn't perform fear, doesn't perform anything at all. The man who simply is steady, measured, present, like a rock sitting at the bottom of a river while the current moves everything else around him. Marcus James was that man. And on a gray Tuesday morning in the fall of 2019, when the prison transport van pulled through the gates of Hargrove Correctional Facility in Macon County, Georgia, Marcus James stepped out onto that cracked concrete yard and looked at his new world with the same expression a chess player might use when he sits down at a board he's never played on before. Not afraid, not excited, just reading the board. What nobody at Hargrove knew, not the guards, not the warden, not the population of 312 men who would soon share space with him, was what those quiet eyes had seen, what those calm hands had done. What that still, broad-chested man had been before life brought him to this place, they were about to find out. And one man in particular, a man named Kyle Briggs, who had spent 3 years building a reputation inside those walls as someone not to be crossed, was going to get the most thorough education of his life. But we'll get to that. First, let's talk about where Marcus James came from. Marcus James grew up in the West End neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia, a place that in the 1990s had the particular combination of beauty and danger that shapes either broken men or exceptional ones, and rarely anything in between. His mother, Gloria, worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility. His father was present sometimes, and then not at all, and then present again in the way that fathers sometimes try to reverse their absence with sudden intensity. Marcus learned early to rely on himself. Not out of bitterness, he wasn't a bitter child, but out of simple necessity. When Marcus was 14 years old, a man named Coach Raymond Walls opened a boxing gym 3 blocks from his apartment building. It was nothing fancy. A converted auto repair shop with a cracked concrete floor, 2 heavy bags, a speed bag with a broken mount, and a ring that leaned slightly to the left. But Coach Walls had trained amateur fighters for 30 years, and when he watched the 14-year-old Marcus James hit a heavy bag for the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt like he was watching something rare. Marcus had what coaches call natural economy. He didn't waste movement. He didn't swing wild or lead with his chin or fall into the basic traps that most beginners stumble through. He moved like someone who had been doing this in a previous life and just needed to be reminded of it. His jab was straight. His feet found balance automatically, and most importantly, he listened. Every correction Coach Walls offered, Marcus absorbed completely and immediately, never needing to be told the same thing twice. By 16, Marcus was the best amateur in his age group in the state of Georgia. By 19, he turned professional. What followed was 11 years of the most brutal and beautiful sport in the world. Marcus James fought 38 times as a professional. He won 34 of those fights, 27 by knockout. He held the NABA light heavyweight title for 2 years. He was ranked number 2 in the world by the WBC. And in October of 2009, in a sold-out arena in Las Vegas, Nevada, he stepped through the ropes to fight Victor Carrera for the WBC light heavyweight championship of the world. He lost by split decision. 2 judges gave it to Carrera, 1 gave it to Marcus. The boxing community was divided for weeks. Some said it was robbery. Some said Carrera was the better fighter that night. The argument was never fully resolved the way those arguments never are. What was resolved, eventually, was Marcus's career. The title fight loss was followed by 2 more defeats over the next 3 years, not because Marcus had gotten worse, but because the body has a contract with time that no fighter can renegotiate. By 2012, at 31 years old, Marcus James retired. Not dramatically, not with a press conference or a tearful statement, he just stopped. He moved back to Atlanta, he met Alicia. They had a son, Deshaun. Marcus worked construction, managed a small boxing gym on weekends, coached some kids who showed promise. He built a quiet life. Not the life he'd imagined when he was a 22-year-old knockout artist with the whole sport ahead of him, but a real life. A good one. And then, on a Friday evening in March of 2018, everything changed. Marcus and 9-year-old Deshaun were walking to their car in a grocery store parking lot when a man approached them. The man was visibly intoxicated. His eyes weren't tracking right. He had a folding knife in his right hand, and he was demanding Marcus's car keys with the particular desperation of someone who had lost the ability to calculate consequences. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Marcus saw the knife. He saw his son, he made a decision. He stepped in front of Deshaun, and he did what his hands had been trained to do for 17 years. One punch, a right cross thrown with professional precision and power, the same punch that had put 10 professional fighters on canvas in arenas across the country. The man went down. He hit his head on the concrete parking lot divider on the way down. He never fully regained consciousness. Marcus called 911 immediately. He stayed with the man until the paramedics arrived. He never ran, never hid, never denied what happened. He told the police exactly what occurred. He had witnesses. He had a 9-year-old son who watched the whole thing. None of it mattered enough. The district attorney's office argued that Marcus James, with his documented professional boxing background and his registered weapon equivalent hands, had used excessive and deadly force against an attacker who could have been subdued through other means. The fact that he had a knife, the fact that Deshaun was there, the fact that the man had initiated the confrontation, all of it was acknowledged in court. But the DA's office held firm on one point: a man with Marcus's training had choices that an ordinary person did not. Marcus's lawyers recommended he take a deal. Second-degree manslaughter, 7 years. Possibility of release in 5 with good behavior. He signed it. Not because he believed he'd done something wrong. He told Alicia that clearly the night before he reported to begin his sentence. He signed it because he did the math. Because a trial could go 7 different ways and none of them guaranteed better than 5 years. Because Deshaun was 9 years old and Marcus needed a number he could count toward, 5 years. He would count every single day. And that is how Marcus James, former professional boxer, former world title contender, father, husband, man of singular calm and extraordinary skill, arrived at Hargrove Correctional Facility on a gray Tuesday morning and stepped onto that cracked concrete yard with the expression of a chess player reading a new board. Inside Hargrove, reputation was currency. Not money, though that moved too, but the social capital of being known, being feared, or being protected. New arrivals had none of it, which made the first few weeks of any sentence the most dangerous. You were an unknown quantity, which meant you were a target until proven otherwise. Marcus was processed, assigned to cell block B, handed an orange jumpsuit and a brown bag of permitted belongings, and escorted to cell B14 by a young guard named Cole who looked like he'd graduated high school 2 years ago and was still figuring out how to make his face look authoritative. His cellmate, Darnell Washington, was already a known quantity at Hargrove, a 44-year-old man doing his second bid, a quiet and watchful presence who had survived 2 stints inside by the simple philosophy of staying invisible. When Marcus arrived, Darnell took one look at him, the size, the posture, the hands, and said almost nothing. But he watched. Darnell Washington was excellent at watching. At lunch that first day, sitting across from this new cellmate, Darnell asked one question: "You box?" Marcus said used to. Darnell asked, "Amateur or professional?" Marcus said professional, and something shifted in Darnell's expression, a quiet recalibration. Like a man revising a calculation he thought was already finished. He gave Marcus the lay of the land, the block politics, the groups, the unwritten rules. And then he got to what mattered most. He told him about Kyle Briggs. Kyle Briggs had been at Hargrove for 3 years, and in those 3 years he had constructed something rare inside those walls: genuine power. Not just the performance of it, but the real thing. Through a combination of size, ruthlessness, and the particular patience of someone who understood that prison time moved differently than outside time, Briggs had built a network of compliance around himself that functioned like a small government. Men gave him things to avoid what happened to men who didn't give him things. He was 34 years old, 6 feet 2, somewhere around 240 pounds, with the kind of physicality that had never been challenged inside a prison. Not seriously. Not by anyone who'd made him feel it. He had a crew, Tucker, Rooney, and a handful of others, who served as social proof of his authority. Guards, through a combination of resignation and expedience, looked the other way on his smaller operations. Briggs had a system for new arrivals. It was elegant in its simplicity. He found them in their first week, made his offer, and let them make their choice. Most chose correctly. Those who didn't made his point for him. He found Marcus James on day 3. Marcus was walking the perimeter of the yard, his morning routine, slow, deliberate laps, head up, watching everything while appearing to watch nothing. Briggs stepped into his path with Tucker and Rooney flanking him, and he laid out his offer: commissary contribution. Community tax, he called it, which Marcus would later describe to Darnell as the most creative use of the word community he'd ever encountered. Marcus said no, not aggressively, not with posturing or performance. He just said no, flat, simple, and final, the way a man says it when the word carries no anxiety inside it. Briggs, to his credit, didn't escalate immediately. He had a process. He gave Marcus a shoulder check on the way out, hard enough to be a message, not hard enough to be a fight, and told him he had until morning to reconsider. Darnell found Marcus after and told him he needed to think carefully. That it wasn't worth it, that the whole meant lost time, lost good behavior, lost months away from his son. Marcus listened to all of it. He said he understood. Then he went back to his cell and looked at the photograph of Alicia and Deshawn on his shelf for a long time. He was still calm. The next morning, Briggs came to breakfast with 5 men, not 2, 5. This was a statement. This was Briggs communicating, in the language of institutional power, that the time for negotiation had passed. He found Marcus at his usual table near the far wall, away from the noise, and stood over him with his crew arrayed behind him like punctuation marks. Marcus was eating. He didn't look up immediately. Briggs talked. He made his final offer. He used language designed to diminish, to humiliate, to remind Marcus of what his position was and what Briggs's position was. 300 men were in that cafeteria, and the noise level was already dropping table by table as people registered what was happening. Because men in prison are extraordinarily attuned to the specific frequency of a confrontation. Marcus still didn't look up. And then Briggs reached down, slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone was watching, and grabbed Marcus's breakfast tray and flipped it onto the floor. The crash of plastic and food on concrete cut through the cafeteria like a knife. And now the room was almost completely silent. Marcus looked at his food on the floor. Then he looked up at Briggs. And here is where Darnell Washington, watching from 3 tables away, already dreading what he knew was about to happen, noticed something that nobody else in that cafeteria seemed to register. Marcus's hands were flat on the table, palms down, completely still, not gripping the edge, not balled into fists, not shaking, flat, still, relaxed, the hands of a man who is not afraid. The hands of a man who has already decided everything that needs to be decided and is simply waiting for the geometry of the moment to arrange itself. Briggs leaned down into Marcus's face and told him what was going to happen next if he didn't comply. He used specific language. He made specific promises. And then slowly, with theatrical deliberation, making sure every eye in that room was on him, he drew his open palm back and slapped Marcus James across the face. The sound echoed off the cafeteria walls. The room held its breath. 300 men went completely still, and Marcus's head, after the slap landed, moved perhaps 2 inches, no more. Because his neck was built from years of taking shots from professional fighters, and his equilibrium was not something that an open-handed slap from a prison bully was going to disturb. He looked back at Briggs. His face was calm. And something about that, the absolute, unmoved, unbothered calm, sent a signal through the nervous system of every experienced man in that room. Because they'd seen what fear looked like. They'd seen what rage looked like. They'd seen what shock looked like. This was none of those things. One of Briggs's men, Tucker, later told another inmate that the moment he saw Marcus's face after the slap, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt afraid, but Briggs wasn't reading the room. Briggs was looking at what he thought was a man who'd been humiliated in front of hundreds of people and had no response. He was already savoring it. Then Marcus spoke. He said, "Give me your best shot." Briggs blinked. Marcus said it again, quiet, level. Like a man asking someone to pass the salt. "You want to do this, do it right. Give me your best shot. After that, we're even and you walk away. That's the only deal I'm offering." The cafeteria, if possible, got even quieter. Briggs looked around. His reputation was in the room. His authority was being observed. He had 5 men behind him. He had spent 3 years building this moment or moments like it. He had no mechanism for backing down, no architecture for retreat. He rolled his shoulders. He pulled his right arm back. He threw the hardest punch he knew how to throw, a wide, powerful, looping right hand that had put men on the ground before. A punch that had worked every time he'd ever thrown it. What happened next lasted approximately 4 seconds. But those 4 seconds would be reconstructed, debated, described, and retold in Hargrove Correctional Facility for the next decade. Briggs's punch, that big looping right hand, arrived at the place where Marcus James's face was. Except Marcus's face was no longer there. Marcus had moved his head. Not dramatically, not with some cinematic leap backward. He had slipped, the term boxers use for a subtle rotation of the head that makes a punch miss without retreating. A movement so small, so precise, so efficient that if you blinked at the wrong moment you would have sworn the punch landed. It didn't land. It skimmed the top of Marcus's ear and kept going. And before Briggs's arm had even finished its arc, before his weight had even finished transferring forward, before his brain had registered that something had gone wrong, Marcus James threw a left jab. Short, sharp, directly to the center of Briggs's face, not a power shot, a measuring shot. The kind of professional throws first to set distance to establish the range to let the opponent's body react and reveal what comes next. The kind of punch that contains information. Briggs's nose cracked. His eyes watered instantly, the automatic, involuntary response of the body, not a choice. His head snapped back, and then the right hand came, the right cross. This was the punch that had ended careers. Not ended in the sense of the man never boxing again. Ended in the sense that the man who stood up afterward was permanently and measurably different from the man who had stood up before. Marcus threw it with everything his body knew how to do, the rotation of the hip, the push from the rear foot, the shoulder driving forward, the weight of the arm landing behind the fist. Textbook, precise, devastating, it caught Kyle Briggs on the point of his jaw. And Kyle Briggs, 240 pounds, 3 years of institutional authority, the most feared man in Hargrove Correctional Facility, folded, not dramatically, not backward, he simply folded. His knees went first, bending forward. Then his hands came out instinctively as his body tried to find the floor. Then he went down sideways and he did not get up. He didn't get up because he wasn't conscious. He was out before he finished falling. The cafeteria erupted, not into violence, into sound. Men who had been holding their breath for the last 30 seconds all exhaled at once. Chairs scraped, people moved. Tucker and Rooney stood there staring at their unconscious boss on the cafeteria floor with the particular frozen expression of men whose entire worldview has just been rearranged in 4 seconds. Tucker took one step toward Marcus. Marcus turned and looked at him. He didn't say anything. He didn't move toward him, he just looked. Tucker stopped. Rooney stepped backward. A guard at the far end of the cafeteria was already running, already reaching for his radio. Marcus was already on his knees, hands laced behind his head before the guard reached him, cooperative, unhurried. Like a man who had already calculated this outcome and was simply executing his part of it. Darnell Washington, lying flat on the cafeteria floor with his hands over his head as protocol required, watched Marcus's calm face across 15 feet of concrete. He shook his head slowly. Later in their cell he would say, "Man, you could have just told me you were a world champion." And Marcus would say, "Almost." Warden Patricia Hayes had been running Hargrove for 8 years. In that time she had seen fights, riots, escapes, overdoses, and every variety of institutional crisis that a correctional facility could produce. She was not a woman who was easily surprised. But when she pulled Marcus James's file before calling him into her office, she sat back in her chair and read it twice. 34 wins, 4 losses, WBC title fight, 87% knockout rate. She looked at the incident report. She looked at the witness statements, multiple inmates, and one guard confirming that Briggs had initiated, escalated, and thrown the first real punch. She looked at Briggs's 3-year history of documented complaints that had never resulted in charges. She looked at the infirmary report, broken nose, concussion, jaw injury requiring wiring, and she made a decision. 2 days in protective isolation, not punishment, she made clear to Marcus, but politics. The population needed time to recalibrate. Briggs's crew needed time to understand that the geometry of Hargrove had changed. No additional charges. Warden Hayes also made another decision, one that she would later describe in a program review as the best institutional investment I made in 8 years at this facility. She told Marcus about the recreation room, the heavy bag, the speed bag, the equipment that had been gathering dust because no one qualified enough wanted to supervise it. She told him she wasn't asking him to run a program or serve as a counselor. But if he wanted to use the equipment, and if others happened to use it while he was there, she wouldn't call that an unauthorized activity. Marcus signed the volunteer form. The first day Marcus went to the recreation room, he was alone. He taped his hands the way he had taped them 10,000 times, wrapping the knuckles, the thumb, between the fingers, and he stood in front of the heavy bag for a long moment with his forehead resting against it. Just resting. Like he was reintroducing himself to something he had almost forgotten. Then he started to work, and the sound of it moved through the walls of the cell block like something living. By the 4th day, 3 young men were standing in the doorway. By the end of the 2nd week, Marcus had 6 regular visitors to the recreation room. Within a month, the number was closer to 12. He didn't give speeches. He didn't announce a program. He didn't stand up and talk about what boxing had done for him or what it could do for them. He simply showed up, worked, and when someone was doing something wrong, he corrected it. Your feet are wrong, fix your feet before you touch the bag again. Stop muscling it, a punch is not about strength, it's about sequence. Legs, hips, shoulder, fist in that order every time. You're holding your breath. When you hold your breath, your body goes tight. When your body goes tight, you're slower, breathe. The young men listened. Not because Marcus demanded it. because when they did what he said, they could feel the difference in their own bodies. When your jab finally lands clean for the first time, when you feel the whole chain of your body working together the way it's supposed to, something happens to you that is difficult to describe but impossible to forget. You understand something about yourself that you didn't understand before. That understanding matters inside a prison, maybe more than outside one. Because inside, a man's relationship with his own body, with what he's capable of, with what he can control, is one of the few things that belongs to him. Among the young men who came to the recreation room was Darius, 22 years old, in for armed robbery, burning with a rage that had nowhere useful to go. On his first day, Marcus watched him throw punches at the heavy bag like he was trying to destroy it, all aggression, no architecture, wasting energy and going nowhere. Marcus stopped him. He told him, "You're fighting the bag, don't fight the bag doesn't care. The bag has no feelings, you throwing yourself at it in anger is only tiring yourself out, talk to it instead." Darius looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Talk to it, every punch is a question," Marcus said. "The way the bag responds tells you what to ask next. It's a conversation, anger is a monologue, fighting is a dialogue." Darius worked on it for 2 weeks. And then one morning, something clicked. The feet found the right position, the hip turned over, the jab landed exactly where it was meant to land, and Darius stopped moving and looked at his own fist like he'd never seen it before. He didn't say anything. But he came back the next morning, and the morning after that. Warden Hayes noted in her monthly report that incident rates in cell block B had decreased by 31% in the 2 months since Marcus James arrived. She wrote the observation carefully, without drawing direct conclusions. But she noted it. 3 weeks after the cafeteria, Kyle Briggs came back from the infirmary. He was different. Not broken, Briggs wasn't the type to break cleanly, but something in the architecture of him had shifted. The way he moved through the block was subtly altered. The authority was still there in his posture, the crew was still with him, the surface of things was roughly the same. But the conviction behind it had cracked, the way concrete cracks, not all at once but in ways that matter. His men were watching him differently, not with less respect exactly, but with the particular attentiveness of people who have revised their understanding of something they thought was permanent. A week after his return, Briggs found Marcus in the yard. Alone, no Tucker, no Rooney, just him. He stopped Marcus. And what he said next was not what anyone would have predicted from Kyle Briggs, who had spent 3 years at Hargrove building an identity on the premise that he was the hardest thing in these walls. He said, "I know who you are now." He said he'd looked Marcus up in the facility library. He said he'd read about the WBC title fight. He said he'd seen the record, 34 wins, 27 by knockout. And then he said, "You could have hurt me a lot worse." Marcus confirmed that this was true. And Briggs asked him something genuine. Something that had been sitting in him since he woke up in the infirmary with his jaw wired shut and the complete memory of what 4 seconds had felt like. He asked, "Why didn't you?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he told him the truth. He said he wasn't fighting anymore. He said everything that happened in that cafeteria was because Briggs had put his hands on him, and the moment Briggs went down, the fight was over. He didn't need to destroy him. He didn't need to make a statement or establish dominance or send a message to the population. He needed to get home to his son. That was all. That was the only objective he was operating under inside these walls. Everything he did served that purpose and nothing else. Briggs was quiet for a long time, and then he said something that surprised them both. He said he had a daughter, 8 years old. Her mother hadn't let her visit in over a year. He said it quietly without looking at Marcus, the way people reveal the things they're most ashamed of, quickly, looking sideways, as if they might be able to take it back if necessary. Marcus said he was sorry to hear that, and he meant it. The 2 men stood in the yard in silence for another moment. Neither of them moved toward friendship. That wasn't what this was. But something honest had passed between them, the particular honesty that becomes possible when the performance of strength has been stripped away and 2 men are left standing in the wreckage of it. Briggs walked away. He never came at Marcus again, not that day. Not for the rest of the time Marcus James spent at Hargrove Correctional Facility. Every Sunday, Marcus wrote a letter. He wrote it to Deshawn. He kept a notebook, one of the permitted items, and he wrote in it every day, but the letters he actually sent were the Sunday ones. He wrote about what he was thinking, about boxing, about the men he was working with in the recreation room, about things he remembered from before, about things he wanted to teach Deshawn when he got out. He wrote once, "I want to teach you what I've learned about patience, not the passive kind, the active kind. The kind where you're doing something every single day that moves you toward where you're going, even when you can't see it getting closer. The minute hands moves and you don't notice. The hour hand moves and you notice a little. But when you look at the clock at the end of the day, you understand that those minute hands were building something the whole time. Be a minute hand, Deshaun, keep moving. Deshaun didn't respond to every letter. He was 11. He was playing Little League and going to school and navigating being the kid whose dad was in prison, which Marcus knew was its own complicated terrain. But Alicia wrote that he kept them, that he had a box under his bed where he put each one. Marcus looked at that photograph every night before he went to sleep. The two of them, Alicia and Deshaun, laughing at something off camera. He had memorized every detail of that photograph in the way you memorize things when they are your reason. He counted the days, everyone. 4 years and 8 months later, Marcus James walked out of Hargrove Correctional Facility. Good behavior, vocational credits, one incident report from his first week. Warden Hayes shook his hand in her office before he left. She told him what he planned to do. He told her about the Boys Club in Atlanta, a community program that had reached out after learning about what had grown organically in Hargrove's recreation room. They needed a coach, not just for boxing. They needed a presence. Someone who had been somewhere real and come back from it with something worth passing on. Hayes told him he was exactly what a program like that needed. He thanked her. He picked up his bag. He walked down the long beige corridor for the last time, past the intake desk where Delgado had processed him 4 years and 8 months ago, through the reinforced door, past the chain-link fences topped with concertina wire, past the guard towers and out through the final gate. He stopped on the other side. He stood there for a moment with the Georgia sun on his face, sharp and real in the way that only outside sun is, after years of seeing it filtered through fences and windows. He breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way Coach Walls had taught him to breathe between rounds, and then he heard a voice. Dad, he turned. Deshaun was running across the parking lot toward him, 15 years old now, long-legged, arms pumping, wearing a baseball jersey, covering 50 feet of asphalt in about 4 seconds with the particular beautiful urgency of a boy who has been waiting a long time for this moment. Marcus dropped his bag. He opened his arms. Deshaun hit him at full speed, not a gentle reunion but a collision, the full weight of a teenage boy who has missed his father for nearly 5 years, and Marcus caught him without staggering. Those strong arms closed around his son, those scarred hands pressed flat against Deshaun's back, and Marcus held on with everything he had. Alicia reached them a moment later, walking fast, her face doing everything it had been trying not to do for the last 100 yards. Marcus reached out one arm without releasing his son and she stepped into it. The three of them stood together in a prison parking lot in the Georgia sun. Nobody said anything for a long time. There was nothing to say that the moment wasn't already saying better. This is a story about a man who walked into a room full of people who didn't know what they were dealing with. It's a story about a bully who made the last mistake of his reign, and about what happened in 4 seconds in a prison cafeteria that changed the social architecture of an entire facility. But more than that, more than the knockout, more than the quiet competence, more than the reputation that spread through Hargrove like something organic, this is a story about what a man does with his hands when the world has already seen the worst of what those hands can do and decided to define him by it. Marcus James decided differently. He decided that those hands, the ones that had put men on canvas in arenas across the country, the ones that had ended one man's life in a parking lot in an act of protection that a jury decided was too much, those hands could also teach. Could correct a young man's stance, could tape someone else's knuckles, could write letters to a son every Sunday without fail, building a stack of paper that would live in a box under a bed until a boy was old enough to understand every word of it. Marcus James was not defined by his past. He was shaped by it. There's a difference. Kyle Briggs never reoffended after his release. He reconnected with his daughter. He has never spoken publicly about what happened in that cafeteria. But those who knew him at Hargrove say that after a man named Marcus James put him on the floor in 4 seconds and then, weeks later, expressed genuine sympathy about his daughter, something in Briggs recalculated itself in a way that stuck. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do to a man isn't hurt him. Sometimes it's show him that you chose not to. Darius, the angry young man from C Block who learned to talk to the heavy bag instead of fighting it, was released 2 years after Marcus. He now coaches at the same Atlanta Boys Club. He's 26 years old. He has a son of his own. He names one punch, a short, sharp left jab that he uses as a teaching tool, the Marcus. And Deshaun James. The boy in the photograph, the reason for the count, the purpose behind every minute hand day. He's 16 years old now, tall, quick, has his father's eyes, he doesn't box. But every Sunday he reads the letters in the box under his bed. And he's learning to be a minute hand.